The rain came down hard that evening. Thick, cold, and unforgiving, it transformed the city into a blur of gray and amber, washing over luxury cars and hurried pedestrians clutching designer umbrellas. But in one forgotten corner beside the park entrance, it revealed a scene so devastating that it would shatter one man's carefully constructed world. There, on a low concrete wall beneath the shadow of towering buildings, an old woman sat hunched and alone, her thin frame shaking against the bitter cold. Her gray hair hung in wet strands across her weathered face, and her faded coat clung to her shoulders, heavy and useless against the storm. In her trembling hands rested a cracked plastic container filled with lukewarm rice and beans, the only comfort she could afford. With slow, deliberate movements, she lifted a spoonful to her lips, her quiet prayers mixing with the rain that streaked down her cheeks. Across the sidewalk, a man in a tailored charcoal coat stood paralyzed. He had been striding confidently toward his Mercedes after closing another $1 million deal when something made him stop, made him look, made his breath catch in his throat. Something about the way she bowed her head before each bite, the familiar slope of her shoulders, the gentle dignity in her suffering, tore through 39 years of success and pride. He raised his hands slowly, wiping rain from his eyes, his heart pounding with a recognition too terrible to accept. Why was someone so frail, so forgotten, eating alone in such misery? And why did she look like a ghost from the past he'd spent 2 decades trying to bury? The world, it seemed, had no mercy for the sins we think we've outrun. If you believe in redemption, in the moments that break us open so love can finally get in, and in the truth that no empire can fill the emptiness where a mother's love should be, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to the channel. This reminds us that sometimes the richest man is the poorest soul, until he learns what truly matters. Bradley Lawson's day had been a war. 3 hours in the Sterling Tower boardroom, facing down investors who questioned every projection, dissected every strategy, challenged every decision with the kind of cold scrutiny that would have broken lesser men. But Bradley wasn't a lesser man. At 39, he'd clawed his way from nothing to everything, built Lawson Dynamics from a garage startup into a tech empire worth $500 million. He didn't break under pressure. He thrived on it. The contracts were signed, the $50 million funding secured, another victory in a career built on victories. So why did he feel nothing? Bradley stood in the elevator descending from the 42nd floor, watching his reflection in the polished chrome doors. Designer suit perfectly tailored, Swiss watch glinting under the LED lights, hair styled with product that cost more than most people spend on groceries. He looked like success, smelled like success, embodied success. But inside there was only emptiness. The elevator chimed. Ground floor. Bradley stepped out into the marble lobby, nodding absently at the security guard whose name he'd never learned, and pushed through the revolving doors into the evening air. The rain hit him immediately. Not a drizzle or a shower, but a full assault, thick, heavy drops that turned the sidewalk into a river within seconds. People scattered, scrambling for awnings and doorways, newspapers held uselessly over their heads. The city transformed into a blur of umbrellas and hurried footsteps, everyone desperate to escape the storm. Bradley stood still, letting the rain soak into his expensive coat. He should move. His Mercedes was parked just across the street, 17 steps away. But something held him there, some exhaustion deeper than physical tiredness. The rain intensified as though trying to drive him back, but Bradley pushed forward. 30 feet. 20. The woman hadn't noticed him yet, lost in her small ritual, her moment of thanksgiving for a meal that shouldn't have required thanks. It should have been a given, a basic human right, not something to pray over in desperate gratitude. 15 feet. Bradley's pulse quickened. There was something about the way she sat, not slouched in defeat but upright despite everything, maintaining some core of dignity even as the world literally rained down on her. Something about the careful way she ate, making each bite last, treating the meager meal like it mattered. 10 feet. A memory flickered at the edge of his consciousness. A small kitchen. A woman standing at a stove, her back to him, humming. The smell of rice and beans and something else. Love, maybe, or sacrifice. The memory was fragmented, half-formed, but it carried weight. 5 feet. The woman's posture, he knew that posture. The slight slope of her shoulders, the way she held her head. The careful movements of someone who'd learned to make less feel like more. No, it couldn't be. Bradley's hands started shaking. His vision blurred. Logic screamed at him that it was impossible, that his mind was playing tricks, that grief and guilt could make you see things that weren't there. He hadn't thought about her in years, had trained himself not to think about her, had built walls so high that the past couldn't climb them. But the past didn't need to climb. It was sitting right in front of him, eating rice in the rain. 3 feet. Bradley opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His throat had closed. His heart hammered so hard he thought it might crack his ribs. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, to protect himself from whatever truth waited in the space between them. But he couldn't walk away, not anymore. The rain pounded harder, turning the world into water and noise. The woman must have sensed his presence because she looked up slowly, rain streaming down her face, her tired eyes squinting to see who was standing there. Their gazes met, and Bradley's entire world shattered. The face was older, decades older. The lines deeper, carved by years of hardship he'd never witnessed. The cheeks hollow, the skin weathered by sun and wind and too many nights without shelter. But the eyes, those eyes he'd seen every morning of his childhood, those eyes that had watched him leave for school, those eyes that had been filled with tears the night he walked away forever, those eyes were unmistakable. "No," Bradley whispered, the word torn from him. "No, no, no." His knees buckled. His hands came up to his face. The expensive watch, the tailored suit, the polished shoes sinking into the mud, none of it mattered. Nothing mattered except the impossible truth staring back at him. The woman's container slipped from her hands, rice scattering into the rain. Her trembling fingers came up to her mouth, her eyes widening with recognition that mirrored his own. She knew him too. 22 years of distance, 22 years of silence, 22 years of carefully constructed denial, all of it collapsed in an instant. Bradley's lips formed a word he hadn't spoken in over 2 decades. A word that tasted like home and heartbreak and every sin he'd ever committed. "Mom." The question hung in the rain between them. Impossible, devastating, undeniable. And in the moment before she answered, Bradley Lawson's carefully built empire crumbled to dust. The name died in his throat. Bradley stood there, rain hammering against his shoulders, his mouth open but silent, as though his body had forgotten how to form words. His mind screamed that it was impossible, a trick of the light, exhaustion from the endless meetings, some cruel coincidence in a city of millions. People looked like other people all the time. Strangers shared features. The human brain was wired to find patterns, to see familiar faces in crowds. This wasn't her, it couldn't be her. But his hands were shaking. Not the slight tremor of cold or nerves, but a violent shuddering that traveled up his arms and into his chest, making his breath come in short, shallow gasps. Bradley pressed his palm against his stomach, feeling the nausea rise like a tide. His expensive Italian shoes were sinking into the mud, rain soaking through to his socks, but he couldn't move, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stare at the woman who looked so impossibly, devastatingly familiar. The woman tilted her head slightly, squinting through the rain at him. Her container of rice and beans sat forgotten in her lap now, her attention fully on the stranger standing frozen before her. Bradley wanted to run, wanted to turn and sprint back to his car, drive to his penthouse, pour himself a drink, and pretend this moment never happened. He'd built his entire life on control, controlling his emotions, his circumstances, his narrative. He decided when to feel, what to remember, how to move forward. But control was a luxury he no longer possessed. The past crashed over him in waves. He was 7 years old again, sitting at a wobbly kitchen table in their cramped apartment on the east side, the kind of neighborhood where sirens were lullabies and gunshots punctuated dinner conversations. The table had only 3 chairs because they couldn't afford a fourth. Not that it mattered. There were only 2 of them. His mother stood at the stove, her back to him, stirring something in a dented pot that smelled like onions and hope. She was humming, always humming, some melody he never learned the name of but that lived in his bones like a second heartbeat. "Bradley, baby, wash your hands," she'd said without turning around. He'd complied, standing on his tiptoes to reach the sink, using the sliver of soap that was more memory than substance. When he returned, she'd already filled his bowl, generous portions of rice and beans, the edges touched with hot sauce because that's how he liked it. Her bowl sat across from him, smaller, always smaller. "Mama, you didn't take enough," he'd said, his child's voice filled with concern that wouldn't fully calcify into understanding for years. "I had a big lunch at work, baby. I'm stuffed." She'd smiled, and he'd believed her because children believe their mothers, especially when the truth is too painful to comprehend. It was only later, years later, that he'd understood she'd been skipping meals so he could eat, working double shifts as a cleaner at the hospital, coming home with raw, cracked hands that smelled like bleach and sacrifice, then standing at that stove to make sure her son had food in his stomach and warmth in his heart. The rain seemed to fall harder, pulling him deeper into memory. He was 12 now, walking home from school with his backpack, new to him, bought from the thrift store where everything smelled like other people's lives. Some kids from the better neighborhood had followed him, their taunts sharp as knives. "Welfare rat." Section 8 trash. "Your mom's a janitor. My mom says she cleans toilets." Bradley had run, shame burning hotter than anger, and burst through the apartment door with tears he refused to shed. His mother had been there, still in her work uniform, her eyes immediately reading the hurt he tried to hide. "Baby, what happened?" "Nothing." "Bradley." "I said nothing." He'd shouted it, his preteen rage misdirected at the only person who'd never hurt him. She'd simply pulled him into her arms, let him cry into her shoulder, and whispered the words that haunted him still. "You're going to do great things, baby. You're going to leave all this behind." And God help him, he had. By 17, the shame had fermented into something darker, resentment, bitterness, a desperate hunger to escape not just the poverty but everything associated with it. He'd gotten the scholarship to state, a ticket out, a chance most kids from his neighborhood never got. The night before he left should have been a celebration. Instead, it became the worst night of his life. Bradley could still see it with perfect, terrible clarity. The apartment somehow smaller than he remembered, the walls closing in. His mother had made his favorite dinner, rice and beans with pieces of chicken she'd somehow afforded. She'd been smiling, proud, talking about how he'd visit on holidays, how she'd save money to take the bus to see him on campus. "You'll call every week?" she'd asked, her eyes bright with hope and impending loneliness. "Sure, Ma." "And you'll study hard, make me proud." Something in her tone, that needy, clinging quality, had snapped something inside him. All the years of hand-me-downs, all the nights hearing her cry when she thought he was asleep, all the shame of being the poor kid, the welfare kid, the kid whose mother cleaned up other people's messes, it erupted. "You think I'm coming back here?" The words had come out cold, cruel. "You think I'm going to end up like you, breaking my back for minimum wage, living in this dump?" Her face had crumbled. "Bradley, I didn't mean. This place, this life, it's suffocating me. You're suffocating me." He'd grabbed his bag, moving toward the door. "I'm getting out and I'm never looking back." "Baby, please. Stop calling me that. I'm not a baby. I'm not yours anymore. I'm done." She hadn't yelled, hadn't screamed, hadn't tried to stop him. She just stood there, tears streaming down her face, one hand pressed to her heart as though trying to hold the breaking pieces together. "I love you," she'd whispered. But Bradley had already walked out the door. That was 22 years ago. He'd kept his promise. Never called. Never visited. Sent a single letter years later to an address that was no longer valid, convincing himself he'd tried, that it wasn't his fault the universe had severed the connection he'd been too cowardly to maintain. He'd told himself she was probably fine, probably moved, probably found some happiness somewhere. He'd told himself so many lies they became easier than the truth. The rain brought him crashing back to the present. Bradley was on his knees now, though he didn't remember falling. Mud soaked through his expensive pants. His vision swam. The woman was still there, still watching him with those eyes that held decades of pain and impossible patience. She leaned forward slowly, as if approaching a wounded animal. Her hand trembled as she reached toward him, not quite touching, hovering in the space between recognition and disbelief. Her lips moved, once, twice, testing a name she hadn't spoken in over 2 decades. Time seemed to stop. The rain paused mid-fall. The city held its breath. "Bradley." The word was soft, tentative, filled with fragile hope and terrible certainty. It cut through him like a blade, sharp and clean and devastating. His mother's voice, older, weaker, weathered by years of hardship he'd never witnessed, but unmistakably hers. The impossible was real. And Bradley Lawson's carefully constructed world shattered into a million irreparable pieces. "Mom." The word ripped from Bradley's throat like something torn from his very soul, raw, broken, saturated with 22 years of buried grief. He collapsed forward, his forehead nearly touching the wet ground, his hands clutching at the mud as if trying to anchor himself to reality. But reality had become quicksand, pulling him under, drowning him in the weight of what he'd done, what he'd lost, what sat before him in a rain-soaked coat eating rice from a cracked container. "Mom, He couldn't finish. His voice splintered into sobs that shook his entire frame. Businessmen passing by slowed their steps, staring at the well-dressed man on his knees in the mud. A couple under a shared umbrella whispered to each other. Someone raised a phone, possibly recording. Bradley Lawson, the Bradley Lawson, CEO of Lawson Dynamics, the man whose face graced magazine covers with headlines like "The Relentless Rise of a Self-Made, Breaking Apart in Public," and he didn't care. Let them watch, let them record, let the whole world see. Nothing mattered except the woman before him. Linda set her container carefully on the wall beside her, her movements slow and deliberate, as though sudden motion might shatter this impossible moment. Her weathered hands, knuckles swollen, skin thin as paper, reached toward him, trembling. She touched his shoulder with a lightness that carried the weight of every sacrifice, every sleepless night, every prayer whispered into the dark. "It's really you," she whispered. Her voice was rougher than he remembered, worn down by years and circumstances he couldn't begin to imagine. "My boy, my Bradley." He looked up at her through the rain and tears, seeing her fully now. The years had been cruel. Her face was a map of hardship, deep lines carved around her mouth and eyes, cheeks hollow, skin weathered by sun and wind and too many nights without shelter. Her hair, once dark and thick, hung in gray strands around her face. She was thinner than memory allowed, her frame so fragile it seemed the wind might carry her away. But her eyes, those eyes still held the same warmth, the same bottomless love that had been his only constant in childhood. "What happened to you?" Bradley choked out. Why are you?" He couldn't form the question. Couldn't ask how his mother had gone from that small but sheltered apartment to eating alone in the rain. Couldn't reconcile the woman who'd worked herself to exhaustion to give him opportunities with the woman before him who looked like she had nothing left. Linda's hand remained on his shoulder, steady despite its tremor. "It's a long story, baby." "Tell me." His voice broke again. "Please tell me everything." She was quiet for a moment, her gaze distant, traveling back through years of pain she'd carried alone. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady, holding no accusation, no bitterness, only the simple truth of survival. After you left, I kept working at the hospital, double shifts, sometimes triple when they'd let me. She paused, her fingers absently smoothing a wrinkle in her soaked coat. I was proud, you know. My son going to college, first one in our family, I told everyone. Bradley's chest constricted. But then I got sick. Nothing dramatic, just pneumonia that wouldn't quit, missed too many shifts. They let me go. She said it matter-of-factly as though discussing the weather. Couldn't make rent. Tried finding other work, but at my age with my health, the world doesn't have much use for sick old women. No, Bradley whispered. No, no, no. The shelter was full most nights. I learned to find safe spots under bridges at first, then the park. This wall became my favorite. The tree gives some cover when it rains. She gestured to the gnarled oak above them, its branches offering almost no protection. And people are kind sometimes. They leave food or spare change, enough to get by. Each word was a knife. Bradley felt them pierce through him, shredding the carefully constructed narrative he'd built about his success, his independence, his justified distance from the past. While he'd been closing million-dollar deals in climate-controlled boardrooms, his mother had been sleeping under bridges. While he'd been featured in Forbes, she'd been begging for spare change. While he'd convinced himself she was fine somewhere, living her life, she'd been here, hungry, homeless, alone. I looked for you, he said desperately, though even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were a lie. He'd looked once, half-heartedly, early on, then let himself be convinced by a returned letter and his own cowardice that she'd moved on, that the connection was severed beyond repair. Linda smiled sadly, as if she could read every lie he'd ever told himself. No, baby, you didn't. The truth landed like a physical blow. I'm sorry, he gasped. God, I'm so sorry. The things I said, what I did to you. Hush now. Her voice took on that maternal firmness he remembered from childhood, the tone that could soothe any hurt or quiet any fear. You were 17, angry, desperate to escape. I understood. You shouldn't understand. Bradley's voice rose, drawing more stares from passers-by. I abandoned you. I said horrible, unforgivable things. I left you and I never came back. And you were trying to survive, Linda said quietly. Just like I taught you to, just like I did. How can you not hate me? The question came out as a broken whisper. Linda shifted on the wall, reaching out to cup his face with both hands. Her palms were rough, calloused from years of hard labor and harder living. Rain streamed between her fingers, but her touch was warm, achingly familiar. Because you're my son, she said simply. That doesn't stop. Doesn't matter how much time passes, how far you go, what words get spoken in anger. You've been in my heart every single day since you left, every prayer, every thought. Every morning I woke up wondering if you were okay, if you were happy, if you'd found what you were looking for. Tears streamed down Bradley's face, mixing with the rain. I found nothing. Everything I built, it's empty, meaningless. I thought success would fill the hole, but it just got bigger. Oh, baby. Linda pulled him closer, and he collapsed against her, this grown man in his expensive suit sobbing into his mother's rain-soaked shoulder like the child he'd once been. She held him as the rain poured down, one hand stroking his hair with infinite gentleness. You finally came home. The words broke something fundamental inside him. Home. He hadn't had a home in 22 years, just expensive spaces filled with expensive things that never once felt like the cramped apartment where love had been the only luxury they could afford. Come with me, Bradley said, pulling back to look at her. Please, let me take you home, my home. I have to, please, Mom, let me fix this. Linda's expression grew uncertain, hesitant. Bradley, I couldn't. You have your life. I won't be a burden. A burden? He gripped her hands, holding them between his. Mom, I've been a burden on my own soul for 2 decades. Please, I'm begging you, come with me. Let me take care of you like you took care of me, like I should have done years ago. She searched his face, looking for certainty, for sincerity, perhaps for the boy she'd raised beneath the man's features. "Are you sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Linda was quiet for a long moment, then slowly she nodded. "Okay, baby, okay." Bradley helped her stand, her legs unsteady from the cold and years of hardship. He shrugged off his expensive coat, the one that cost thousands, the one that meant nothing, and draped it over her shoulders despite her protests. It swallowed her small frame, but at least it was dry, warm. As they moved toward his car, Bradley's arm supporting her weight, the rain began to soften. The downpour eased into a gentle shower, as if even the storm recognized that something had shifted, that some cosmic balance was beginning its slow tilt toward redemption. Behind them, the white container sat abandoned on the wall, its contents cold and forgotten. Neither of them looked back. The elevator ascended in silence. Bradley watched the numbers climb, 20, 30, 40, each floor another layer of separation from the world his mother had been surviving in. Beside him, Linda stood wrapped in his coat, still dripping rainwater onto the polished marble floor. Her reflection in the mirrored walls showed a woman who looked impossibly small, impossibly out of place in this gleaming vertical chamber that cost more per square foot than most people's homes. She gripped the handrail with white knuckles. "We're almost there," Bradley said softly, though he wasn't sure if he was reassuring her or himself. The penthouse occupied the entire 47th floor. When the elevator doors opened directly into his living space, no hallway, no transition, just immediate entry into obscene luxury. Bradley saw it through his mother's eyes for the first time in years. And he was ashamed. Floor-to-ceiling windows wrapped around three sides, offering a panoramic view of the city glittering below like a jewel box. The floor was Italian marble, white with gray veining, imported at criminal expense. The furniture was all clean lines and designer names. A leather sofa that cost $40,000, abstract sculptures that meant nothing but looked expensive, a dining table that could seat 12 but had only ever held his laptop and takeout containers. Everything was pristine, untouched, cold. Linda took a single step inside and stopped. Her hand moved to her chest, fingers pressing against her heart as though trying to steady its rhythm. Her eyes traveled slowly across the space, taking in the grand piano no one played, the wine collection Bradley never drank, the original artwork he'd bought because his decorator said it would elevate the space. "Bradley," she whispered, "this is where you live." The question held no judgment, but Bradley heard the weight beneath it. "This is what you chose over me. This is what 22 years bought you." "Yes," he said, the word tasting like ash. This is it." Linda moved carefully into the living room as if afraid she might break something, her wet shoes leaving dark prints on the marble. She paused at the window, looking out at the view that had once thrilled Bradley with its symbolism. "Look how high I've climbed, how far from the East Side slums." Now it just felt like distance, empty, meaningless distance. "You can see the whole city from here," Linda said quietly. "Yes. But you can't see anyone, can you? Not really, not from this high up." The observation landed like a punch. She was right. From here, people were just dots, anonymous and insignificant. He'd convinced himself that elevation meant success, but all it really meant was isolation. "Mom, I'll show you to the guest room. You can shower, change. I'll order some clothes." "Bradley," she turned from the window, her eyes finding his. "I don't belong here." "Yes, you do. You belong anywhere I am." "Baby, look at me." She gestured to herself, the soaked coat, the worn dress underneath, the shoes held together with duct tape. "And look at this place. Oil and water, honey. Some things don't mix." "Then I'll change the water," Bradley said fiercely. "This place, it's just things. You're my mother, you're what matters." Before Linda could respond, the sound of the elevator arriving interrupted them. Bradley turned, confused. He hadn't called anyone and then remembered. His assistant had a key for emergencies and he'd sent her a brief text from the car. Taking time off. Cancel everything. Alina Price stepped out of the elevator, her expression hovering between concern and professional curiosity. At 32, Alina had been Bradley's right hand for 5 years. Efficient, brilliant, unflappable. She'd seen him through hostile takeovers, board meetings, and countless crises. But she'd never seen him like this, disheveled, emotional, with a homeless woman standing in his living room. To her credit, her face revealed nothing but careful assessment. "Mr. Lawson," she began, then noticed Linda and smoothly adjusted. "I'm sorry to intrude. Your text was unusual. I wanted to make sure everything was all right." Bradley moved protectively toward his mother. "Alina, this is Linda, my mother." Alina's eyes widened fractionally, the only crack in her professional composure. Everyone who worked for Bradley knew his history. Orphaned young, raised himself, built his empire alone. It was part of his legend, his mythology. The self-made man who'd come from nothing with no one. Except it had all been a lie. "Your mother," Alina repeated carefully. I didn't realize." "Neither did I," Bradley said, "until 2 hours ago." Alina's sharp mind was already working, reading the situation. The wet clothes, the obvious poverty, the tears still evident on Bradley's face. She didn't ask questions. Instead, she simply nodded. "What do you need?" she asked. "Everything," Bradley said. "Clothes, toiletries, food." He looked at his mother. "What do you need, Mom?" Linda shook her head. "I don't want to be any trouble." "You're not trouble," Bradley and Alina said simultaneously. Alina pulled out her phone, already making notes. Clothing sizes. Linda looked uncomfortable, but provided them quietly. Alina typed rapidly, her fingers flying across the screen with practiced efficiency. "I'll have everything here within 2 hours," Alina said. Then, gentler, "Mrs. Lawson, it's a pleasure to meet you." "Just Linda, honey, and thank you." Alina nodded, then turned to Bradley. "I'll reschedule your meetings for the rest of the week. If you need anything at all, call me." She left as efficiently as she'd arrived, the elevator doors closing on her knowing, slightly concerned expression. Alone again, Bradley guided his mother down the hallway to the guest suite. He opened the door to reveal another space of absurd luxury. King-sized bed, spa bathroom, sitting area with its own television and sound system. Linda stood in the doorway, not entering. "This is bigger than our old apartment." "I know." "That bathroom," she pointed to the marble and glass enclosure visible through the open door, "is bigger than our old bedroom." "I know, Mom." "What did all this cost?" Bradley couldn't answer. Couldn't tell her that the guest bathroom alone cost more than she'd earned in 5 years of breaking her back at the hospital. Couldn't reconcile the numbers that had once represented success with the woman who'd worn the same shoes for 3 years, so he could have new ones for school. "Too much," he finally said. "It all cost too much." Linda turned to him, reading the pain in his face. She reached up, still having to reach up, even though he'd grown tall, and touched his cheek. "You did what you thought you had to do," she said softly. "I did what was easy," Bradley corrected. "Running was easy, forgetting was easy, building walls was easy." He gestured to the penthouse around them. All of this was just a bigger wall." "But walls can come down, baby." "Can they?" "You brought me here, didn't you? That's a start." Bradley helped her out of the wet coat, found her towels, showed her how the shower worked, each small service feeling like penance, like prayer. When he left her alone to clean up, he returned to the living room and stood at those massive windows, looking out at the city he'd conquered. What had it all been for? The question echoed in the vast, empty space. The deals, the victories, the relentless climb. He told himself it was about proving he was more than his circumstances, more than the poor kid from the bad neighborhood. But standing here now, in this monument to his own ambition, Bradley saw it for what it really was. A monument to fear. Fear of going back. Fear of being that hungry kid again. Fear of feeling small and helpless and poor. So he'd built higher, earned more, surrounded himself with expensive proof that he'd escaped. But he hadn't escaped. He just traded one prison for another. His phone buzzed. A leaner asking about dietary restrictions, medical needs, a dozen practical considerations he hadn't thought of. He texted back answers, or tried to, realizing how little he knew about his own mother's life now. Did she have health problems, allergies, medications she needed? 22 years of silence had left a canyon of questions. When Linda emerged an hour later clean, wearing one of Bradley's oversized robes, her hair wrapped in a towel, she looked both better and worse. Better because she was warm and dry. Worse because the shower had revealed just how thin she was, how fragile, how much damage poverty had done. Bradley had ordered food, real food, not the containers of rice and beans, and they sat at the enormous dining table, feet apart but feeling miles of unspoken words between them. "Tell me about your life," Linda said, picking at her soup. "Your real life, what you do, what makes you happy." Bradley opened his mouth to list his achievements, the company valuation, the successful launches, the headlines, but the words died, because the truth was simpler and more devastating. "Nothing makes me happy, Mom. I thought it would. I thought success would feel like something, but it's just numbers, just deals. Just endless meetings where everyone wants something from me and I want nothing from them." "You must want something," Linda pressed gently. "People don't build empires without wanting something." "I wanted to matter," Bradley admitted. "I wanted to prove I wasn't just another poor kid who'd disappear into statistics. I wanted the world to see me." He met her eyes. "But the only person who ever really saw me, I walked away from." Linda reached across the table, taking his hand. "You see me now." "It's not enough. It's nowhere near enough." Bradley felt something shifting inside him, some tectonic plate of his identity moving. This penthouse, the company, the money, it's all just stuff, empty stuff. While you were suffering, I was accumulating stuff. "What are you saying, baby?" Bradley looked around his pristine, soulless home, then back at his mother, this woman who'd sacrificed everything and still somehow found the grace to forgive him. "I'm saying my life needs to mean more than profit," he said quietly. "I built an empire. Now I need to figure out what empires are actually for." Linda smiled, the first real smile he'd seen since finding her. "Now that sounds like the boy I raised." Outside the windows, the city continued its indifferent dance. But inside the penthouse, in the space between regret and redemption, something was beginning to shift. Bradley Lawson had spent 22 years running from his past. Now, finally, he was ready to face his future. 3 months later, Bradley Lawson walked into the Lawson Dynamics boardroom with a proposal that would have been unthinkable 4 months earlier. The 12 board members sat around the glass conference table, their expressions ranging from curious to concerned. These were the people who'd helped him build his empire, venture capitalists, industry veterans, strategic partners. They'd backed him through risks before, trusted his vision when others doubted. But what he was about to propose wasn't a risk, it was a revolution. "Gentlemen, ladies," Bradley began, standing at the head of the table with none of his usual commanding presence. He looked different now, still professional, still sharp, but something in his eyes had softened. "I'm here to inform you that I'm selling my controlling stake in Lawson Dynamics." The silence was immediate and total. Then chaos erupted. "You're what?" Marcus Webb, the CFO, half rose from his chair. "Bradley, that's insane," said Patricia Chen, his longest-serving board member. "The company's valuation is at an all-time high. This is the worst possible time to—" "It's the perfect time," Bradley interrupted calmly. "The company is strong. Leadership is solid. My departure won't damage the brand. It might actually help it." "Help it?" Marcus sputtered. You are the brand. Lawson Dynamics without Lawson is just Dynamics. Then maybe it's time for it to be about more than one man's name. Bradley pulled out a folder, sliding copies across the table. I'm retaining a minority share, enough to stay involved in major decisions. The rest will be liquidated. The proceeds will fund a new venture. Patricia flipped open the folder, her eyes scanning the numbers. $240 million. Bradley, what could possibly require? A network of shelters and community centers, Bradley said. Starting here in the city, then expanding nationally. Full-service facilities offering housing, medical care, job training, mental health services. Everything people need to rebuild their lives. The boardroom remained silent, but the quality of the silence had changed. Confusion mixed with something else. Perhaps recognition that this wasn't a momentary impulse but a fundamental transformation. This is about your mother, isn't it? Patricia said quietly. Bradley met her eyes. Yes, and about the thousands of other mothers, fathers, children living on the streets while people like us debate quarterly earnings in rooms like this. Bradley, we understand the sentiment, Marcus interjected, his tone careful. But this is a business decision being driven by emotion. Philanthropy is admirable, but... This isn't philanthropy, Bradley cut him off. This is restitution, atonement, call it whatever you want. My mind is made up. Then why are you telling us, Patricia asked, if the decision is final? Professional courtesy, and because I value your input on the transition plan. Bradley's voice softened. You've all been with me through this journey. You deserve to know why I'm stepping back. Marcus leaned back in his chair, studying Bradley with new eyes. She must be quite a woman, your mother. She is, but this isn't just about her. It's about remembering what it felt like to be invisible, to be the person everyone walks past without seeing. Bradley looked around the table. We've all gotten very comfortable up here, maybe too comfortable. No one argued. In the end, they voted to approve the transition. Not because they agreed with his reasoning, but because Bradley Lawson had earned the right to walk away from his own empire. As the meeting concluded, Patricia caught his arm. I hope you find what you're looking for. I already did, Bradley said. Now I'm just trying to deserve it. Alina stood in the empty warehouse, her heels echoing on the concrete floor. The space was massive, 30,000 square feet of potential in a neighborhood that had seen better decades. Outside, the sound of construction crews echoed through the air. Inside, blueprints and permits covered a makeshift desk. This is where you want to build it, she asked as Bradley entered behind her. This is where it needs to be, he corrected. Close to downtown, accessible by public transit, in a community that actually needs it. It's going to take 6 months minimum to convert this place. Then we'd better start today. Alina turned to face him, her professional mask slipping slightly. You know the media is going to have a field day with this. Tech mogul's guilt project. Millionaire finds mommy, starts charity. They won't be kind. I don't need them to be kind. I need them to be irrelevant. A sound at the entrance made them both turn. Linda stepped carefully through the doorway, leaning on a cane, a recent addition after doctors discovered arthritis had damaged her hips more severely than anyone realized. But her face, once hollow and gray, now held color. 3 months of regular meals, medical care, and safety had begun to reverse years of damage. She looked around the warehouse with eyes that understood what others couldn't. This is good, she said simply. Real good space. Mom, you should be resting, Bradley said, moving to her side. I've rested enough. Linda walked further in, her cane tapping rhythmically. If we're doing this, I want to help do it right. Alina watched the exchange with something like wonder. In 5 years of working for Bradley, she'd never seen him defer to anyone. But with Linda, he simply nodded and listened. What would you change? He asked his mother. Linda surveyed the space with the expertise of someone who'd lived the reality they were trying to address. The sleeping areas, you've got them in the back corner. That's wrong. Why? People who have been on the streets, they need to see the exits, need to know they can leave if they panic. Put the beds where they can see the doors. She pointed with her cane. And the showers, you've got 4. You need at least 12. People wait all day sometimes for a shower. Makes them feel more helpless. Alina was typing rapidly on her tablet, adding notes. The common areas, Linda continued, they can't feel institutional. No fluorescent lights, that's what shelters have, what hospitals have. Makes people feel like charity cases instead of guests. Use warm lighting. Put in real furniture, not plastic chairs. That'll increase costs, Alina noted. I don't care about costs, Bradley said. What else, Mom? For the next hour, Linda walked them through the space, transforming it in her mind from a warehouse into a sanctuary. She spoke about dignity, about the small things that made people feel human, private storage for belongings, quiet spaces for those overwhelmed by crowds, a kitchen where residents could cook their own meals, not just be served. And a garden, Linda said finally. Outside in that lot, a place to grow things. People need to feel like they're creating something, not just receiving. Bradley looked at Alina, who nodded. We can make it work. All of it, Bradley confirmed, everything she said. The media attention came exactly as Alina predicted. The announcement, tech CEO liquidates majority stake to fund homeless initiative, made national headlines. Reporters descended, eager for the story, for the angle, for the weakness in the armor. Bradley gave exactly one interview, to a local reporter named Sarah Mitchell, who'd covered homelessness issues for years. Some people are saying this is a guilt project, Sarah said, her recorder sitting between them, that you're trying to buy redemption. Those people would be right, Bradley answered simply. I am trying to buy redemption, but not with money, with action. There's no amount of money that erases what I did to my mother, the years I stole from us both, but maybe it can prevent other families from experiencing that same loss. What about accusations that this is just a tax write-off, a PR stunt? Let them accuse. The people who'll sleep in warm beds and eat hot meals and get medical care won't care about my motives. They'll just care that they're finally being seen. The interview went viral, not for controversy but for brutal honesty. People weren't used to public figures admitting fault, admitting guilt, admitting that success could coexist with profound failure. The praise came next, editorials calling him a model philanthropist, think pieces about corporate responsibility. Bradley ignored them all. Praise felt as hollow as the criticism. Only one opinion mattered. You're doing good, baby, Linda told him one evening as they reviewed architectural plans. Really good. It's not enough, Bradley said. It'll never be enough. No, Linda agreed, but it's something, and something is how you get to everything. 6 months after that first boardroom meeting, Linda's haven opened its doors. The line started forming at dawn. Men, women, families, people who'd heard about the new shelter, who dared to hope it might be different from the ones that turned them away when beds ran out or rules got broken. Bradley stood at the entrance with Linda, Alina beside them, as the first residents entered. He'd wanted to make a speech, to mark the occasion somehow, but Linda had vetoed it. Just open the doors, she'd said. Let them come home. An older man was first through, weathered face, military tattoo faded on his forearm, carrying everything he owned in a garbage bag. He stopped when he saw the interior. The warm lighting, the real furniture, the dignity built into every design choice. This is for real, he asked, voice rough with disbelief. This is for real, Linda answered, moving forward with her cane. Come on in, let's get you settled. Bradley watched his mother guide the man inside, watched her speak to him with the understanding only shared experience could provide. watched her transform from recipient of charity into deliverer of hope. Millionaire touched his arm gently. "You did it." "No," Bradley said, his eyes never leaving his mother. "We're just getting started." Throughout the day, residents arrived. Each one was greeted, registered, shown to clean beds with fresh linens. Families were given private rooms. Medical staff conducted intake exams. The kitchen served hot meals, not institutional slop but real food prepared with care. As evening fell, Bradley walked through the shelter, seeing it full for the first time. The sound wasn't silence or chaos but something in between. The gentle hum of people finding safety, finding rest, finding a moment to breathe without fear. In the common room, Linda sat with a group of women, listening to their stories, sharing wisdom earned through hardship. She looked up when Bradley entered, her smile radiant. In that moment, Bradley Lawson understood something fundamental. He'd spent 22 years building an empire that made him rich. It had taken his mother 3 months to teach him how to build something that made him whole. 1 year later, Bradley woke to the sound of rain. Not the violent, punishing downpour that had brought him to his knees in that park, but something gentler, a soft percussion against the penthouse windows that felt less like assault and more like conversation. He lay still for a moment, listening, remembering. So much had changed in 12 months that, sometimes, he barely recognized his own life. The penthouse was different now. The coldly pristine spaces had given way to something warmer, more lived in. Photographs lined the shelves, pictures of Linda's Haven's opening day, candid shots of residents laughing, images of the community garden in full bloom. His mother's favorite blanket draped over the expensive leather sofa. Her reading glasses sat on the coffee table beside a book of poetry she'd been working through slowly, savoring each page. Evidence of life, of love, of a home instead of a monument. Bradley rose quietly and padded to the kitchen, where he found Linda already awake, standing at the stove. She moved more easily now. Physical therapy and proper medication had eased the worst of her arthritis. She'd gained weight too, her frame no longer quite so fragile. Her hair, still gray, was styled nicely. She wore a comfortable dress and the slippers he'd bought her 3 months ago, after she'd admitted the old ones hurt her feet. "You're up early, Mom," he said softly. She turned, her face lighting up the way it always did when she saw him, as though his presence was a gift she'd never stopped being grateful for. "Couldn't sleep. Thought I'd make us breakfast." The scene was so simple, so domestic, so absolutely ordinary, and yet Bradley felt his throat tighten with emotion. There had been a time when he'd thought he'd never see his mother again, never share a morning with her, never watch her hum quietly while cooking in his kitchen. "Let me help," he said, moving to her side. They worked together in comfortable silence, eggs, toast, fresh fruit. None of it fancy, none of it expensive, just real food shared. When they sat at the dining table, the same table that had once felt like an empty wasteland, it felt full, complete. "Millionaire called yesterday," Linda said, buttering her toast. "Said the second shelter is ahead of schedule." "That's because you scared the contractors," Bradley teased. "Told them if they cut corners you'd know." "I would know," Linda said seriously, then smiled. "But they're good people, they care about the work." Linda's Haven had been so successful that they'd opened a second location across town, with plans for a third in development. Linda had become the face of the organization, not Bradley, as the media had expected. She consulted on every design choice, interviewed staff personally, and spent 3 days a week at the original location, simply being present for residents who needed someone who understood. She'd found her purpose in the very pain she'd survived. "I'm meeting with the city council next week," Bradley said. "They want to talk about expanding the medical services. Will you accept their funding?" "I don't know. I don't want bureaucracy slowing everything down." "But you might need the partnership eventually." Linda looked at him with those wise eyes that had seen so much. Pride is useful, baby, but not when it stops good work from happening. Bradley smiled. When did you get so wise about running nonprofits? When did you get so wise about listening? Linda countered gently. They finished breakfast, and Bradley cleared the plates, another small ritual that still felt profound. The CEO, who'd once had assistants manage every detail of his life, now found meaning in washing dishes beside his mother. His phone buzzed, Eleanor with her daily update. Bradley scanned it quickly. A reporter wanted an interview, a major donor was interested in contributing, routine matters at the shelters. Work, Linda asked. Nothing urgent, it can wait. You've changed, Linda observed. A year ago, you would have answered that immediately. A year ago, I didn't know what was urgent and what was just noise. Linda reached across the table, taking his hand. Her touch was no longer trembling, no longer tentative. She held his hand firmly, with the strength of someone who'd survived and found solid ground again. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Not because of the shelters, though those are wonderful. I'm proud because you found your way back, to yourself, to what matters. Bradley's vision blurred. I don't deserve. Hush, we're not doing that anymore. Linda squeezed his hand. You made mistakes, I've made mistakes. Everyone makes mistakes. What matters is what you do after. I wasted so many years, Mom. Years we could have had together. Then let's not waste any more talking about the ones we lost. The wisdom in that, the grace of it, took his breath away. She'd suffered more than he could fathom, lost years of her life to homelessness and hardship because of his abandonment. And yet she refused to live in that suffering, refused to let bitterness poison the time they had reclaimed. How do you do it? Bradley asked. How do you forgive so completely? Linda was quiet for a moment, considering. Because holding on to anger would mean letting you hurt me twice, once when you left, and again every day I chose to stay hurt. I love you too much to keep hurting myself. The simple profundity of it struck him silent. Outside the windows, the rain continued its gentle rhythm. Linda rose and moved to look out at the city, now washed clean by the soft storm. Bradley joined her, standing beside her, both of them looking down at the world below. Can you see Linda's haven from here? She asked. Bradley pointed to the east, just barely, that cluster of lights. All those people finding shelter tonight, Linda murmured, finding hope, because you decided one man's empire should mean something more than profit. Because you taught me what love looks like, Bradley corrected. Everything I know about sacrifice, about giving without expecting return, about seeing people instead of statistics, I learned from you. Then I did something right, Linda said softly. They stood together in silence, watching the rain wash over the same city where they'd found each other again, where pain had transformed into purpose, where a chance encounter in a storm had changed everything. Do you ever think about that night? Bradley asked. In the park. Every day, Linda admitted, but not with sadness, with gratitude. Gratitude. That the rain was hard enough to make you notice, that you were walking past that exact spot at that exact time, that God or fate or whatever force guides these things gave us a second chance. She turned to him, her eyes shining. How many people get that, baby? How many people get to come back from that kind of loss? Bradley pulled her into a hug, holding her gently, feeling the solid warmth of her presence, real, alive here. I love you, Mom. I should have said it every day for 22 years. I'm going to say it every day for the rest of my life. I love you too, baby. Always did, always will. The rain outside began to ease, tapering into a gentle mist that caught the city lights and turned them into something like stars. Bradley thought about the man he'd been a year ago, driven, successful, hollow. A man who'd measured his worth in dollars and deals, who'd built walls so high he couldn't see over them anymore. That man had died in the rain, on his knees in the mud, confronted with the cost of his ambition. And in his place, someone new had emerged. Someone who understood that wealth without love was just accumulation, that success without connection was just isolation, that all the empires in the world couldn't fill the space where a mother's love should be. "You've done well, my son," Linda said, echoing words from a year ago but with deeper meaning now. "Not just with the shelters or the money. You've done well with your heart." Bradley's throat tightened. "I'm still learning." "We all are, baby, we all are." They stood together as the rain gentled into nothing, as the storm passed and left the air clean and clear. Tomorrow, Bradley would return to Linda's haven, would meet with donors and city officials, would continue building a legacy that mattered. Tomorrow, Linda would counsel residents and offer wisdom and continue transforming pain into purpose. But tonight, this moment was just theirs. Mother and son, reunited by rain and redemption, standing in a penthouse that had finally become a home. Outside, the city continued its endless dance. Inside, two people who'd lost each other and found their way back simply held on, grateful for second chances, for gentle rains, for love that survived even the longest storms. If you believe in redemption, in the power of love to transform even the hardest hearts, and in the truth that our greatest wealth is measured not in what we accumulate, but in who we choose to become, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. This story reminds us that sometimes we have to lose everything to find what truly matters, and that the rain that breaks us open can also wash us clean. Bradley Lawson built an empire that made him rich, but his mother's love rebuilt his soul. And in the end, that was the only wealth that mattered.